Right, hey everyone, can you hear me okay? All good? Well, thank you for being the brave one that take their lunch slot to listen to me. My name is Frederic Rivain. Sorry. How do I? What's next? Yes. All right. I'm Frederic Rivain. I'm the CTO at Dashlane. I've been there for almost 10 years. I'm going to celebrate 10 years on November 2nd, so it's been quite a journey that I'm going to share with you. Before that, I worked in different industries. I've been in online gambling, in the video game industry. I've been in e-commerce. And one thing sort of across my career has been that I think it's really important for you to trust your product. Whatever the product you're in, whether it's a game, whether it's e-commerce and so on, trust is really at the heart of everything we do. And that's even more true for a product like Dashlane, which is a security product. And that's been really what's been the focus for all my career, to think how I can scale trust. And that's kind of what I want to share today with all of you. Who knows about Dashlane? Oh yay, a few hands, thank you. Happy to do that. But before we dive in the story a bit about ourselves, we came out as a consumer product, a consumer password manager, evolved into enterprise. We still have both B2C and B2B, two sides of the business. We provide password management, so we store your passwords, your passkeys, your secrets, your sensitive information. And on the enterprise side, we have about 25,000 customers that trust us to also provide them with a broader credential security platform. We do credential risk detection, we do phishing detection, and all type of things related to identity in a sense. And kind of the unique thing about us, I think, is that we try to really be as simple and as convenient as possible. That's kind of our root from being a consumer product originally. And we try to marry that with the highest security possible. So trying to find the right balance between user simplicity and security has been a sort of our trait. And I think that's something that really matters for adoption and also really matters for trust. I don't know if some of you work on product where trust is kind of the currency, kind of the adoption factor, but you at least all know theoretically that trust is hard to gain and even faster to lose. So that's why it's so important to think about how you can scale trust with your customers and with your product, because that's what's going to drive your business and the success of your business. So kind of looking back in the rearview mirror for the Dashlane story, I think that I want to look at trust across three dimensions. Of course, technology is a big piece of it. We're a security product, we're a technical product, so it matters a lot. But that's not the only dimension. Like culture, your company culture, your leadership culture matters a lot in the way you do trade-off, the way you address your security product. And at the end of the day, it's the choices you make as an organization. Like how do you make sure you do right by your customers always to maintain that trust? All right, let's get started with the early days of Dashlane. So that's going to be a lot about storytelling and things, some of the wins, some of the bets, some of the mistakes we've done. And I hope you can get some of those lessons and take them back to your own context afterwards. So the first early days, like 2010 to 2014, actually I was not at Dashlane at that time. But it felt important to share those lessons because that's the one I inherited when I joined as a CTO in 2015. And they've kind of shaped some form of the DNA of the organization. So they're kind of important. There are times where it was the early days, the organization was trying to find product market fit. They were trying to prove that a small French startup, you can feel that I'm French, even though we live today in Brooklyn with my wife and my three daughters, but that French startup started very small. And how do you make others believe that a French small security product can be trusted at scale? And so there are different lessons. The first one is actually the founding team kept Dashlane in a long public beta for a very long time. It was a free product. And it didn't really work out. Like the growth was very limited, and they had to move to a freemium model, start having a paid model to have credibility and start having a way for people to trust them. The fact that, yet again, a French small startup, free product, can we trust them? Are they going to survive to the next level? Is it worth investing into that product? That was not enough. And so they made it a freemium product. The core was still free, but then you had to pay for the advanced features. And that's where really the credibility came from. And then the second big moment was sort of that 2013 New York Times article from David Pogg talking about that product. And so that really, of course, increased the visibility and made the product more credible in the market. And those are two events, getting to freemium and getting external validation, was what helped us get to the next step and kind of get to the product market fit. So early lessons, if you want to be trusted, sometimes you need to be paid to make sure that we can trust you. Otherwise, you're sort of, the slogan, you're sort of the product if the product is free. One early lesson as well was around platform constraints. So in the early days of Dashlane in the 2010s, they had no choice than choose to build native applications. So we had an application on Windows, one on macOS, iOS, and Android. That's because at the time the browsers were not really mature. I think it was still Internet Explorer era. And for a product like ours, where you need to autofill, you need encryption, you are deeply embedded into the platform, you need synchronization, those browsers were not mature enough, despite the fact that actually most of your authentication life happens in a browser. So they chose to go with the native apps. They spent a lot of time investing in that. It worked for a while until it didn't. And so one of the big nightmare of the early days of Dashlane was what we call the iOS data loss disaster. So that was in 2014 around the upgrade of iOS 8. At the time, iOS, when you didn't have enough space on your phone to do the OS upgrade, would remove all your apps, install the OS, and then reinstall the apps. And of course, we were a local application with encryption happening locally on the device. So the vaults of our customers at that time were wiped clean. No data anymore, no way to recover. As you can imagine, that was a big nightmare for us as a security product. And that's breaking the trust very significantly. So how do you recover from that? Well, you apologize a lot. You give Dashlane for life for free to those customers that lost everything, and you hope that you rebuild the trust. But one other lesson from that moment was also the fact that the update mechanism of your product, especially if you're a native app, is really critical. Like, it's part of your threat model, it's part of your security boundaries. If an update can sort of lock your customers out, can break the data, that shouldn't happen. So you need to build your update mechanism in a way that it's as reliable as authentication, or it's that type of event is as massive as an external breach in a sense from a trust perspective. So think about your update model if you have those type of applications. A bet we made early on at Dashlane was to actually acquire a small startup called Passmatic in 2014, and we used that technology to build a feature called Password Changer. It was a very cool tool. It allowed you in a single click to change the password automatically on multiple websites, and it was really a great wow effect. We used it a lot in marketing. It differentiated us from competitors. It was really the shiny feature that you want to have when you're trying to build awareness and visibility for your product. The other side of the story is that it never really worked perfectly. Unfortunately, it was really too hard to scale it to the level that we wanted. It was really too complicated to make sure that it worked perfectly, reliably all the time. That's because, of course, websites change all the time. The technology in the web environment changes all the time. There are CAPTCHAs, so it's really very hard to scale reliably. Eventually, after many years of riding that marketing narrative with that feature, we decided to sunset it. It was a bit painful because that was our cool marketing shiny feature, but I think it was the right choice, and it's part of the early lesson to know when to say stop and when to retire those features, even though they've been the ones that have helped you ride the story for a long time. To close that first chapter, one very important foundation of trust was our choice of having a zero-knowledge architecture. So what I mean by zero-knowledge architecture is the fact that at no point in time do we want to have access to your data. Your customer data is your own. You have the keys, we don't have the keys. And so the whole architecture around Dashlane has been built around that concept. So we do encryption and decryption of your vault locally on your device. We never see any data in clear. We never see your master password, your main key. So that has been very critical to the whole foundation of Dashlane. The flip side of that is, for an engineering team, it's very complicated because every feature you need to build, you need to think about how do I make sure that I can never see the data? And so it's a lot of additional complexity in terms of technical design, in terms of security and cryptography. Think about if you want to share credentials between two parties, how do you make sure that you never see that data flow, even though you are like the intermediary in that exchange? But at the end of the day, it's critical for trust because it reduces the exposures for the customers, obviously. It reduces the exposure also for Dashlane in terms of liability because it makes us like a sort of secure by design. Another painful thing for the engineering team is also troubleshooting, because if you don't see the data, it becomes very hard for you to troubleshoot and try to debug what's happening. But that's a trade-off we made from the early days of Dashlane, even though it was costly and sometimes it took us more time to build features, but it was really important as a foundation of trust, if you will. So those are the early lessons from the Dashlane story, some of the nightmares that they had. And I inherited all of that when I joined in 2015 with a mandate of saying, okay, now we've achieved product market fit at that point. They had just raised a Series B, they wanted to scale, and I joined to help them scale the business. So scale through million more customers, scale from B2C to B2B, scale through multiple platforms, and as you can imagine, scaling is also coming with a lot of complexity. Actually, when I arrived, the team was already pretty doing well. Like they had achieved that product market fit. They had shipped fast. They had shipped boldly. They had innovated quite a lot. So there was no burning fire. I didn't have to rebuild everything. So I took the time to learn and really get onboarded with the right amount of time. At first, I really met with everybody in the organization, like to 30 minutes to understand, okay, how are things? How is your work life? How is your personal life? I had my little method with 3 questions, like how happy are you from 1 to 5? What do you like to work most on? And what would you like to change? And that really gave me like sort of the visibility into, okay, what was working well, what didn't work so well, and we wanted to improve. I spent time, like, of course, going through sprint planning, sprint previews, the architecture, and so on to understand how we had to scale. And so the lesson for me was actually they had gone fast, but also a bit more too much into survival mode, trying to get to the next level of the startup journey. And they didn't really have the best practices to really be able to scale without creating too much chaos. So that's what we focused on. That maybe seemed funny in almost 2026, but we migrated to Git at the time to make sure that we had a real versioning control in place and were able to collaborate the right way. We set up the first continuous integration at Dashlane to make sure we could collaborate together. We started doing test automation. We started putting mandatory systematic code review process in place, which didn't exist at Dashlane at the time, which was weird for a security product. So all those practices were really meant for us to be able to scale the right way. But actually, like, the technical scaling is where the most challenges, we found the most challenges. The first one is, I mentioned that we had a lot of different platforms. We had Windows, all the versions of Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, all the browser extensions, including the Internet Explorer. That became a real burden for the organization. We were pretty small, and each platform had their own technical stack, their own maintenance overhead, their own security risk and exposure and context. And so it was really way too costly for us to be able to support all of that. So in 2019, we actually took the very hard decision to say, okay, we're going to sunset the desktop native apps. We're going to stop supporting Windows and macOS as native applications. From a customer standpoint, it kind of made sense because most of your authentication life already happened in the browser. But as you can imagine, when you have that those applications being used by already millions of customers, it's tough to manage as a transition. I still think it was the right choice. Maybe we could have taken that choice a bit earlier on, but not that much earlier because the browser maturity needed to be there. But it helped us like reduce the exposure from a security standpoint, reduce the cost for the organization. I wanted to mention also our autofill engine because that's core to the Dashlane product, the way we detect login forms and fields and autofill. This is really core to the value of Dashlane. And same thing, that's been a painful thing to maintain because it was originally in C++ in the native apps with a lot of complicated communication between the native app and the browser. And we had to rewrite it multiple times and eventually write it in JavaScript so that it could run standalone in the browsers. But when you have a small organization and you need to rewrite the core of your product multiple times, it's very costly, very, very complicated. So you still have to do it, but those are the type of projects which are hard to embed into the roadmap. Because we have so many platforms, we also like sort of guess on those ecosystems, and we have to live with those ecosystems. Some of you may be familiar with what that means, but for instance, Firefox has a crazy submission rule when you want to submit an extension. Chrome, a few years back, decided to migrate the architecture of the extension from Manifest v2 to Manifest v3. And that was a nightmare for people like us that have very deeply integrated extension into the browser ecosystem. There was a lot of conversation at the W3C level with those things, but and so you have to try and lobby and make things better. I mentioned the iOS 4 upgrade, which was a nightmare for us. But so we have to live with that. We have to sort of accept that those happen. It means also that you need to build a relationship with those ecosystems to make sure you can also influence and shape the future of those platforms. But that's something that's really important in an engineering team, and that's kind of putting friction on the path to scale. And if I look back at that time, there are also 2 big mistakes that we made at the time. The first one is we had a lot of technical debt from the early days. So that's something we had to be careful about, and we didn't pay fast enough. There was a lot of technical debt from the rapid experimentation from the early days. And the second thing is that sometimes we over-engineered too much for security. We wanted security to be too perfect. And for instance, our sharing feature was a very cool sharing feature in the first versions. It was kind of a mini blockchain, mini ledger long before blockchain. But we didn't need that complexity, so we rewrote it at some point, made it way simpler. And I would argue it's still a bit too complicated. Okay, I need to accelerate because I'm not going fast enough. Important point about encryption, especially for a security product, you always need to be ahead of the game. You need to be, it's a game of cat and mouse with the hackers out there, so CPUs, GPUs, the power is going faster and faster, so you need to be ahead of the game. So one early decision we took was to migrate from PBKDF2 to Argon 2. At the time, Argon 2 was not even like a standard, was not even NIST approved and anything else, but we took that bet. We made the migration, and one thing that was very important for us is that we didn't want to lock people out. So that was a long migration. As you can see, it took us about 3 years to migrate all the platform because we had been burned by that iOS upgrade type of event, and we wanted to make it the right way. Okay, I'm going to play a little outbreak here because I think it's fun. So I'll let you watch it and then I'll comment on it. So it was a cool ad. It was a Super Bowl ad, so I let you imagine the price of the Super Bowl ad. It was a massive mistake. We did that in February 2020, a few weeks after COVID hit. Everything stopped. So it was fun. Like we had a big spike of visibility and awareness for a few weeks, months, and then it was nothing. So my advice, never do a Super Bowl ad. It's not worth it. That big mistake came with a lesson for us because we are still very much of a consumer product trying to bring awareness to consumers, which is very, very expensive. And we are a small startup. Of course, we had raised quite a lot of money, but still the ROI is not there. And so at that point, we decided we need to pivot to a more B2B where we can differentiate and where there's more of a potential ROI. We still have a large B2C business, and we're happy to have that population, but really the money is in the B2B, let's be honest. Okay, final part of the story. So at that point, we are in B2B, we are growing fast and growing well. And so the last few years of the story are really about, we're still kind of between the hammer and the anvil. On the one side, you have the big tech, Apple, Google, you have the SSO providers, the Okta of the world. Our other competitors are, of course, expanding as well and growing their business. And we're still a relatively small player. So we're kind of in between. What do we do? Do we kind of try to double down on getting the business out there and trying to keep the lights on, or do we need to invest into innovation because we need to differentiate and so if we want to be there in the long run? So you have that kind of innovator's dilemma that plays out, which has been a lot of the tension we've had in the organization in the past few years. And I actually think that we did the right thing because we tried to turn more towards innovation, and that's why I guess we're still here. But I'm going to share a few of those innovations. So the first one is confidential computing. I don't know how many of you are familiar with confidential computing, but like I said, our core principle is zero knowledge. We never want to have access to your data. But if you start integrating your product in a B2B ecosystem with third-party providers, then how do you do it? How do you manage that zero knowledge concept when data flows are going outside of your product? The example is our first version of integrating Dashen with SSO required our customers to host in their infrastructure a small backend component to be able to store their keys. That was secure, that was zero knowledge, but it was very painful and created a lot of friction for our customers. We didn't know how to do that. And so with confidential computing and the hardware secure enclave in the cloud, we're able to move that component and that storing of keys into the cloud in a secure way, but in a way more convenient fashion for our customers. And we've been using that more and more in our product in a way to really expand our zero knowledge footprint beyond the device into the cloud. By the way, if you're and I know there are a lot of students as well here, but if you're in a company that's in health tech, in ed tech, that processes a lot of sensitive data for your customers, I strongly encourage you to look at confidential computing. It's still pretty complicated, to be honest. You need to make it right and do it right because it's not a very standard technology, but it's really a way for you to have the famous encryption in use. Like, of course, encryption in transit of the data, encryption at rest on your servers, but the encryption in use is the difficult part, and that's what something confidential computing allows you to do. So take a look at this. It's a really cool technology. a big moment we had in 2022 was the passkey moment. So when the FIDO Alliance, along with Google, Apple, Microsoft, and the whole industry came up with passkeys, that was kind of a turning point for us. Like, okay, what happens if the platform becomes the password of the future? What if there are no passwords? What happens with password managers? It could have been an existential threat for us. We decided to go the other way around and kind of embrace that change. We're already part of the FIDO Alliance, but we decided to join the board to try not only be passive and try to look what was happening, but be shaping the standards, shaping the future as well. And we're one of the first password managers to support passkeys across all platforms. We have our own master passwordless solution today. So if you're a consumer, you can create a Dashlane account without even having a master password. We've really embraced it, and we've been shaping some of the standards. One of the standards that came out recently is called Credential Exchange, which allows you to import and export credentials from one provider to the other, which you could argue should have existed for a long time, but it's just coming out today, and we're happy about this. So just sharing the lesson here that sometimes you have those like a big moment coming from the industry that can feel like very threatening for you as an organization, and you can either retreat, and our CPO at the time decided to leave Dashlane. Too bad for him. I think it was the wrong decision. But we decided to go all in and go with the journey and become sort of a passwordless manager, if you will. And one last lesson of those past few years was also innovation can come from everywhere. And you need the space and the time for the teams to be able to invest into your innovation. So I'm sharing here one which came from a Dashlane hackathon. We run a hackathon every year. One of the big challenges for a product like ours in an organization is that of course, the IT team or the security team is going to deploy Dashlane across the organization, but then you have employees that will use the password manager and others that won't. So how do we make sure that every employee is protected, whether they are using the product or not? And so that team that ran the hackathon wanted to change that paradigm. How can we make sure that the passive employee can be protected as well? And because we are in the browser, we've been deployed in the browser, we can actually do cool stuff. We can detect credential risks in the browser. So if you have an employee typing a weak password or a compromised password manually in the browser, we can see that, and we can detect that, and we can alert the employee that he's doing something wrong, and we can alert the security team that that employee did something wrong, and to create that virtuous cycle. Same thing like you've all heard about AI phishing attacks. Like since ChatGPT came out, I don't know if you know the numbers, but it's like 4,000% increase of phishing attacks. Something like 50% success rate when phishing attacks used to be more of a spray and pray attack. So we're in the browser, we can detect if a website is a phishing website. So we have a model, we do that, and that came also from an innovation from part of the team. We gave them space, and they were able to figure out different ways of approaching the same problem. So I encourage you, all of you in your organization, to make the space for this to happen and to create those pockets of innovation as part of your organizations. Okay, that's it, kind of stepping back on that journey. Trust is not only about cryptography, it's not only about architecture, it's really about culture, it's about leadership, it's about the decisions you make as an organization. How do you stay true to your core principles and to your values? In our case, zero knowledge was a big foundation, and we've tried to be really true to that. Even when the trade-offs are tough, and when you see some of your competitors taking shortcuts, you don't want to take those shortcuts because you know that they will matter in the long run. And my last lesson is also like usability and security are sort of two sides of the necessary coin. You need both together. I'd rather like improve the security a little because I have good UX and good convenience for the many rather than try to be perfect and have too much friction along the way. So try to think about those things in your own journey, in your own product and your own context, and I hope it can give you like a way to move forward in terms of security. By the way, we've tried to also be, I'm going to do a bit of promotion for the CISA here, but they have a cool Secure by Design pledge, which is, I think, important for all of us in the security space to commit to security by design. So unfortunately, they're shut down right now, but you can still look them up, and I encourage you to also sign the CISA Security by Design pledge. It's a good one. Thank you. Questions? Okay, yeah.
Hi. I am a security and privacy individual contributor at a startup, or we can still maybe not a startup anymore. I think there's always a challenge between balancing within your products and kind of like what you've advocated for, taking the long view on building trust with your customers. How do you balance that, and what are some quantitative ways that you've used to
that's why we have an ongoing conversation all the time about balancing that. Like how does security needs to be a selling point to some extent, but it's also a friction point in the organization to move fast and to get new features out. But you need to find that balance by having an open and honest conversation inside the organization. And that's why I was mentioning it. It's a lot also about leadership. Is your leadership, or is the organization as a leadership standpoint mature enough and aware enough of the importance? Of course, you don't want to die, so you need to still move fast, but you also want to make sure you have a business in the long run. One thing that we do, for instance, is we have what we call the risk committee. We have the long-standing risk committee for many, many years. In that risk committee, there's the CEO, there's, of course, myself, our general counsel now, our CISO is in there, she's over there. You can talk to her if you want after the talk. There is also our chief marketing officer, because, of course, marketing always want to know more about your customers, but when you don't see the data, you don't know much about your customers. And that makes sure that the organization always has that conversation. And sometimes say, okay, we're doing trade-off and we're going to be a bit faster here, but we'll catch up eventually or not. And we have our own little risk index that we measure internally. And the goal for us is every year we try to reduce that risk index by 10 points. That's our kind of arbitrary measure, but that's a forcing function to say that, okay, we need to make sure that we don't take too much risk.
I have one more.
Can you take it outside?
Oh,
Sorry, I'll be outside, and we also have a table